everyone that if you sort of put your phone again on a volume, on a high volume during the coffee time, to please mute it again so that we don't interrupt the proceedings. So the way this is going to work with all the working session is that I'll be introducing the moderator, and then the moderator will be introducing the subject and the panelists. So our moderator for this session is David Feldman, managing partner at Exambelat Consulting, with a very long, 30 years plus experience, industry experience, including client practice, and one of the significant role, he was a director of route planning for United Airlines. So David, the floor.
Thank you so much. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Να σε καλά.
Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to be moderating this session over the next 30, or rather, or 60 minutes, take that back. But first of all, I wanted to say, Olivier, congratulations on the big news, the big announcement earlier today. This is great, and this is an important next step. And what's interesting is people in the room are saying, like, yes, finally. And I can really see that, and congratulations. And to all the airports who were involved, of course. What we'll be talking about over the next 60 minutes are some of the strategic challenges facing our industry from a very high level, 37,000 feet, 11,000 meters. We'll touch upon some of the themes that Olivier did in his State of the Industry address. And we'll come back repeatedly to the theme of this event, which is transform or die. One of the things I'm going to want to ask you is, do we really think we will die? But we'll come to that question later on. And when, I guess, is the real question. I want to start out with just a very high-level question, because Olivier presented a picture of the industry, which is, yes, growth is still there, but a lot of clouds on the horizon. What is your outlook, near term, for your airports? And Eleni, as the host of this wonderful event, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, David. So it's true that there are clouds on the horizon. For us, we are calling 2019 a stabilization year, although we do see potential for the future. So this is how we see the current year. We've had growth of 55% in the last 5 years, certainly above the annual average one would expect. But this year, what we are observing is a slowdown, and we think that we will be lucky if we manage to maintain our traffic at the levels of that we have, the new plateau of 11 million passengers that we have reached in the past years. Certainly our industry is facing many challenges, and unfortunately a lot of them are outside our control. Be they geopolitical challenges, the economic reality of the countries that, that provide the traffic to our airports, or even the challenges that the airlines face. So we have to be agile and deal with them as they come. And this is what we're doing this year. We're trying to stabilize at this level, although we see that there is still significant potential for further growth in years to come.
Thank you. Dalton Phillips, CEO of DAA. I'll be introducing each one of you as I come upon you. And I'm going to ask for just a very brief comment on how you see the outlook for Dublin.
Yeah, we're really starting to see it slow down now. We came into the summer around 7% up for the year. We're heavily capacity constrained, so it's hard to eke out more growth. But I'm nervous. I see a lot of pressure in the supply chain. So you see infrastructure costs rising heavily. You see people costs rising heavily, and you're starting to see the slowdown in the revenue. So somewhat concerned. I mean, the longer term is obviously very positive, but the short term, I think we need to be cautious.
Slow down, cautious. Monica Scarpa, CEO of Venice Airport. What is your outlook?
No, I have a different vision.
Great.
We grow, and so we like to can grow together with our other airports, because we not manage only Venice Airport, but also Treviso and Verona, so our smaller airport around us that can help us in the growing. Of course, we are sitting on the lagoon, so for us it's very, very important to take care about our environmental issues.
Great, great. Nicolas Notebert, CEO of ACI Airports. You have many airports, so I imagine you have a very diverse outlook, but let's focus perhaps on the ones in Europe. Yes.
I would say the perspective in Europe is growth. For us, as you know, we decided to invest massively in this industry in the past 10 years. We had 5 million passengers in 2010. We will be over 250 this year. I think the growth is still there, and it's still dynamic. We need probably to work it out a little bit better with the airlines, the tourism industry. Qualitative growth will be needed. Take the example of tourism. Tourism is a need. I followed the Hellenic comments since yesterday. There are many parts of the world, including ours. We manage Portugal, we manage the French Alps, we manage the booming city of Belgrade. Everybody wants visitors. So the trends will be we need to remain, but differently. So we need to change aviation, but we need to change tourism, for instance, what Cyprus does. And everybody is doing it. So the adaptation factors will be triggering the next growth. So my message for that is I am confident because mobility is a necessity for human beings. Mobility is necessary. It's vital. And it's good. It's good for peace. It's good for opening of people. I mean, we are in a place, but it's not the only one. I can tell stories in all countries where the more we open, the more is settled, peace, growth, stability. If we decide to freeze mobility, that will not be just our EBITDA or IR issue. It will be the collapse of the world and in Europe. So I think what is at stake, how do we go on with mobility and growth, not only for our business, but for human beings, while we cope with sustainability, and that will be some of the questions. So I'm confident if we tackle the issues that we are facing for climate change, for inclusion of more people as the beneficiaries. But the growth of mobility is a tendency for me that we couldn't stop as it's deep in the heart of people. They need to move and they need to meet each other.
Olivier, for next year, could the theme of the event in Geneva be mobility is peace? It's very interesting, and I think it's a key point. Dag Volk-Petersen, CEO of Avinor, how do you see it?
For Avinor, we have 44 airports in Norway, and for us, aviation is vital. Without aviation, Norway would look quite different, and I totally agree, the world would be quite different. For us, we are thinking far ahead, and we see aviation is part of the solution, not a problem or part of a problem. We just have to define the future, define how we will operate. And the only problem that it actually has to be addressed is where do we get the energy from and how do we get the energy, especially on board aircraft. So for us, it's not about a reduction in traffic or a decline. It is how do we shape the future, what is our mission, how do we work together with other partners like the airlines and the aircraft producers. So it is a future that we have to design. We have to take lead and we have to continue to operate as we do today and increase traffic. We are all dependent on it. Every one of us all over the world is dependent on aviation. For transport, for cargo, medicine, everything is dependent on aviation. So I look at a bright future for aviation. We don't need any investment in huge road systems and relay systems. It is already there. And you're talking about 30,000 plus feet. In my early days, I was flying fighters, and that's 50,000 plus. So I know that the Earth is curved. You can see it from there, and you can see a huge part of the world. We are, and we should be, in the lead for designing the next few years. That's how we see it.
That's exciting. Robert Sinclair, CEO of London City Airport. Can you beat that?
No. Well, I've been at 60. No, I haven't been at 60. No, that's unbeatable. So, a view from the UK?
Well, I mean, you have some very particular issues with Brexit, with a very constrained airport and a very constrained airport system. So I'm sure you have many.
Where do I start? Thanks, David. All right, remind me of all of those. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, we have a leadership contest now for a new prime minister. We've got massive political instability. We've got a flatlining economy, and as you say, we've got Brexit by the 31st of October. So, outlook for the UK at the moment, I would say, is completely unpredictable, I'd have to say. So watch this space. It's going to be a very interesting second half of this year, I suspect. So to be honest with you, despite all the issues and clouds on the horizon at the moment, we're just getting on with business. Thankfully, we are growing, which is good, in part because of a highly, highly constrained London airport system and London continuing to grow. But who knows? I think it's going to be a bumpy old ride, at least for the next 6 to 12 months.
6 to 12 months is relatively short, isn't it?
It is relatively short. And actually, if you're a big believer in the trend line of aviation, we've chatted about that a couple of times, at this conference, which I am. I am a big believer in the trend line. It will come out of that. But yes, I think in the short term, it's going to be interesting.
Great. Before I go on to the next question, I was reminded to say that if you ask questions, in theory, I will be receiving them here, so I will be able to ask your questions to the panelists if you use the app. When we're talking about sustainability, I want to take it on from a very, as we said, maybe 50,000 foot level, and talk not just about the environmental issues, but the financial, the social, and so on. And I want to focus on what has been maybe the traditional business model of European airports, very much dependent on commercial revenue, very much dependent on duty-free, something that was invented in Ireland how many years ago? Is that a sustainable business model? And what is the threat, the biggest threat? Is it an environmental issue? Is it a political issue? Is it changing demographics? Millennials aren't buying Johnny Walker. Is it more the issue of outside disruptors? Is Amazon the biggest risk to that? Dalton, I'm going to start with you.
So look, there's a whole series of challenges. I think on the larger airports, they have a slightly different needs and concerns than the smaller ones. But I think at the macro, economic stability is, or sustainability is critical. And obviously, we can talk about the sustainability around the climate agenda, but I think you've got to have economic stability. Or sustainability, and that goes back to being able to invest in the infrastructure. If you think about the profit pool, if I think about our particular case, and we look at the profit pool that the airport, and we take Dublin as our biggest airport, we have other airports, but Dublin being the biggest, only of the total profit pool that's generated in that ecosystem out of Dublin, we anticipate that we take about 15% of the profitability coming out. So you've got 85% that's going elsewhere, and yet we're continually challenged as a sector that that we're monopolistic, that we're taking too much. I think 15% of the total profit pool in our ecosystem is something that we should defend vigorously.
So, if I can paraphrase, the biggest threat to your industry is defending the fact that you take only 15% of the total value. What is the biggest threat?
To be specific, it's about that we can afford to invest for the future. So if you cannot afford to invest for future generations, you're going to become an unsustainable model. So if I think about, in the particular case of Dublin Airport, back in the 60s, so before they put a man on the moon, there were people who were safeguarding land for a new runway. So we're in the process of building our third runway at the moment. That took great foresight. Roll forward to today, and we are needing to invest for future infrastructure, future growth, and we're getting squeezed on all angles, but particularly by the regulator who will be squeezing us and saying, actually, airport charges, in our particular case, our airport charges next year will have to come down 22%. And we have one of the cheapest charges anywhere in Europe today. So the economic sustainability is, I think, under huge pressure. Because, fine, you can eke out growth for another 5-10 years, but long term you need to invest. And then there are a whole other environmental sustainability issues that I'm sure others will get into.
Dag, how about you?
Well, of course, there will be different business models evolving in the future. I see aviation as part of the total communication system on the Earth, and we have to work together with all other systems, rail, road, also IT systems, communication. I see an airport as the old ports. In the old days, a port was vital for the development of the country. Airport has the exact same position today, and it will develop. You will have different business models. Of course, it's demanding having or being regulated for us. Of course, it's demanding to invest where you should invest, but you have to cooperate with everybody in the same business. I mean, in the same business is transportation and globalization. So I see new business models coming. To me, that's not a threat, it's a possibility. But I think ACI is doing a great job, I must say that. I'm really happy that ACI is so leaning forward, taking new positions, defending what we are doing. But I think we have to cooperate with all the transport systems in the future to make more money for ourselves, of course, but to create value for the community. Yeah.
Back to my question. One sentence. What's the biggest threat?
Maybe it is that we are a bit, or somebody thinks that we are too slow to change our mindset. But right now, I think ACI is taking the lead role, and that is a possibility more than a threat. Okay. I like to focus on the possibilities, not the threats. Of course, you should analyze and see what is around you, and take all the positions that you can. And if you are there to design the future, it's a lot easier to just be part of someone else designing it. Of course, all the taxation we have is a threat, if you would like to put it that way. But that also has to be changed. How can we get those money to develop the future, like sustainability, new fuel, electric aircraft, which I fancy a lot, flying one myself.
Bravo.
But yeah, so let us focus on what can we do instead of what can't we do.
Okay. So the biggest threat is perhaps negative thinking, the same old thinking, and we need to really think much broader, more strategically.
Yeah, you like to call that, you're focusing on the threats, Dave.
That was the question I asked.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Robert.
Okay, so I'll answer the question. So threats. You know, I mean, obviously, I suspect there'll be a little bit of discussion from my fellow panelists about the environmental and sustainability threat. I mean, I think for me, related to that is the whole issue of capacity. I think we've got a serious issue with capacity constraint across the European airport system that we need to face up to. And my concern is actually exacerbated, I think, by the issue and the topic of this particular conference, which is the environmental sustainability of airports and aviation. But in particular, I don't subscribe to the view that it's going to result in a substantial reduction in demand for air travel. I think people will continue to want to travel. Despite issues of flying shame and so forth, I think we can expect that flying connections and air travel will remain popular. There is a bow wave of people coming to our airports through population growth and through rising incomes, as Olivier pointed out in his presentation. I think the issue is lack of political conviction to actually support airport growth. That is my concern. And we sit here today with some of our major airports, many represented in this room, that are operating at 99.5% capacity. I'm deeply concerned that we will have an airport system that will be choked in the next 5 to 10 years. And in some respects, one would say we have one now. And the Europeans, I believe, are outstanding in their ability to actually get the last little piece of juice out of the lemon, again, as Olivia showed us very visibly on stage, but I believe you can only go so far with that. And the result of all of that, in my view, is increasing airfares. And that will have an impact, and then we will revert then to the days where flying is a preserve of the wealthy, which would be unfortunate in my view.
Interesting. Eleni, how do you see it?
On the question of sustainability first, and then I will talk about the threat. So on the question of sustainability, I think there is only one answer. We are a sustainable business. I'm very optimistic about the future. I think that especially for countries like ours, it's a one way. I mean, there is no other option but to travel by air. So we have to do whatever it takes to make the business sustainable and carry on in the future. There is no other option. But it's not just words. I can see that airports, and I'm very happy that ACI is at the forefront of this, are doing a lot. They are constantly changing their business. They are aware of what's important and the threats, and producing important guidelines on how we should take this forward. So I'm very happy that within the airport business, there is forward thinking to take us, to ensure that the business is sustainable. And I think it is. I don't see any other way for traveling around. I mean, it has made the world, traveling by air has made the world smaller, has increased the standard of living of people, and it's important that we can continue that. I think that there is work to be done in many areas. In my mind, the biggest area is air traffic management. I think airports are doing a lot, airlines are doing a lot. One area that doesn't seem to follow is air traffic management. We could see a lot more there to make the business sustainable. And I would welcome action in that area. So, but generally I am optimistic. I believe we will make the changes. We are forward-looking to ensure that we continue as a business in a sustainable fashion. Concerning the threats, the thing that I worry about most is geopolitical instability. You wake up every morning and some news come up about something happening in the US, in Korea, in some other countries that are so far away from you that may impact you. There is little you can do about them, and yet you have to be ready to face them at very short notice. I don't want to elaborate more on that, but I mean, in recent days we have even seen threats very close to our area of operation. So it's something that, for me, is the biggest worry that we have to face.
Interesting. Monica, from your perspective.
I am optimistic too. I think that it's very difficult what we are trying to do. I'm not saying that it's easier, and all the time I say that in the next life I would like to manage an airport in the desert with a very strong national airlines, and so maybe everything can be easier. But of course the model, my point of view, is sustainable. Of course, the airports need to take into consideration as a whole the financial, the environmental, and everything, I mean. But I am a dreamer, and I think that we can have a success.
Great. Nicola.
So as I said, I'm optimistic about mobility. I'm a little bit less than my colleagues about what we face today. What we face today is really dangerous. The first message, and I think Olivier showed us very strongly with Michel in the last 3 years, we need to unite more with airlines. They need to understand what we told in the past years, that these debates about regulation, I'm sorry, when there is such a danger, the debates about some small sharings between people is nonsense. Now we are all over attacked as an industry, so we need to unite better first. That's the message. Probably 1 year ago, 2 years ago, it was not the case as it is. Now if we don't unite, something is in danger for everybody, and what is at stake is stronger. Secondly, we are facing examples. So you know we need to get an environmental permit this year for a new airport in Lisbon. That will be a nice challenge to see if there is still the room in Europe, within Europe, to have a big new airport, because it's a big new airport. Lisbon capacity, now the only solution is to have a new airport. We will know around autumn, but that will be the right challenge, because if yes, and as you know in France it was not possible in Nantes, that will be a key issue. If Europe is a dying continent where we just let people live the way they have their identity in the 1,000 centuries, Okay, they can, but people are going to move outside. Our young people are going to move outside because nobody in the young generation wants to live in a dying continent just to take care of the elder. I'm sorry. They want projects. So what happens politically, my message is very political. These ways of populism in Europe is the danger everywhere. Not only in EU, in Norway and Switzerland, which is very rich, these populists about identity make 30%. What I tell my people, we need to be open. The open sky of Europe is probably one of the biggest success of Europe. Can you imagine how we democratized in the past 40 years? We need to tell the story. Out of my 4 grandparents, 3 never took a plane in their life. Now they travel every day, they go in vacation in Cyprus, they go. So we need to tell the young that they can live their own life because of aviation, that the old people could travel with their own life. And that's what we did in Europe with open sky and airport policies of every kind, made us a leadership. And that's my only message. I'm not afraid because we are the leaders. As Olivier told this morning, we are leading throughout the world, this industry. I'm sorry for the US, but they are still coping with maintenance issues and so on, which we probably have our Asian colleagues have better quality. We know that because expectation of customers are there, but we can cope with that. And my last message, David, is that the challenge is that we can face disruption if we enter a new phase, more humanized, more face-to-face with people. In our case, we are global, but we decided never to uniformize. Sense of place instead of industry. Very local management instead of moving a lot of people. Being very local, have a contact person to people is the issue. It's not to implement an industrial policy in front of 200. I will never do that. That's why our model still works. We can cope with new countries because we offer something different in each geography. And every passenger, I think that was one of your ideas, needs his personal view. If we do that, I'm very confident.
Those are a lot of issues there. Very interesting, thank you. On the issue of people, I want to, and sense of place, and every airport is different. I want to come back to that later on, but right now I'd like to go back to something that, Robert, you said, and that's flight shaming or flying shaming. Just very quickly on the panelists, is this just the flavor of the month? Or is this something that you think will last and have a serious impact on the way young people, millennials, whomever will be flying or not flying over the next several years? Who would like to answer that one first? Go ahead, Dak.
I think first of all, I think that will last. But that's not the main issue. The issue is, why are they having this shame of flying? It's because of the environmental issue. So if we look forward, and the issue that you are talking about, or all of you guys, what is the problem that you see? What kind of issues do we have to cope with? I think that when we find a solution, or we are on the way to a solution where we are environmentally neutral, or even better than that, for the whole industry, then everybody would like to have us. I mean, they would like to have development in the air transport system. They would like to have a new runway, whether you want it in Heathrow or not, Robert. They would like us to invest where we can to have this super transport going on. So if you look at a bit forward and address what they are thinking and what they are feeling right now, how could you cope with that feeling so that, yes, I am on a travel to a super transport system who is not harming the environment. Doing that gives us a possibility to invest, to further develop, and to have everything that we are talking about as a problem. We can have a solution space.
So I'd make perhaps a couple of observations, if I may, David. The first of which is actually, I think we've got a bit of a communications problem in terms of actually communicating what this industry is doing and has done. Because I think, we have been put on the back foot. Let's make no mistake about this. I think this is an issue, and if we don't get on top of it, it's going to become more of an issue. And it won't just be young people either. it'll transcend everyone. So we definitely need to take a leadership approach in terms of how we focus on this. But I think part of that very quickly needs to be for us to come together as an industry with the airlines and with the manufacturers and collectively communicate the progress that has been made, is being made. And hopefully will be made. And that's one of the concerns that I have, that there is a lot of skepticism out there about the ability of manufacturers to actually design propulsion systems or aircraft that are a lot more emissions friendly, so to speak, environmental friendly. A lot of skepticism. And unless we can actually counter that with hard evidence and progress, I think we're going to be in trouble. That's my first point. My second point is I think society is going to have choices. And I think if you ask somebody what would they rather do, would they rather stop flying or change their diesel car to an electric one, I suspect a lot of people would rather change their car and actually keep flying. And I think the rate of decarbonisation of industry is going to have to go at different speeds for us to continue, hopefully, in our industry and other industries at different paces.
Sure, we want to go ahead, Doug. Sure, of course.
I just want to add what Robert's saying is that the communication is so important, and we are under-communicating the good thing about aviation. One example, in Norway, designing or building a high-speed rail track from Oslo to Bergen would be carbon neutral in 50 to 70 years because of the investment in concrete and drilling a hole in the mountain is so intense in carbon emission. That message hasn't come through. Everybody thinks it's almost carbon zero. It's not. It's really expensive, or carbon expensive to invest in this future. For us, we have all the systems. It's up in the air. So communication, I totally agree with Robert. We need to work on that.
Monica, from your perspective in Italy, because this has been mostly an issue in the Scandinavian countries, a little bit in Germany, UK, is this an issue for you in Italy, in Venice, and do you think this is a longer-term issue?
Of course, it's an issue, and one of the main problem that we have is all the time to share and to discuss with the community and with the politics. Somehow, the politics in Italy in this period of time, of course, has a very short-term view. The most time they are more looking into a short-term consensus than to speak with a long-term view. So this is really a risk that we have all the time. And this may make everything more difficult. And this is the reason why I hope that at European level we really can work together and to have a strong leadership at European level, because we have to go over this small and short-term view that make everything difficult.
Eleni?
I think that flight shaming is not an issue in Cyprus, at least. It seems to be a Northern European issue mostly. Given that we are an island, we don't really have an option to travel. At the same time, I don't understand why flying has been singled out for shaming. I read an article very recently in The Economist that said that aviation contributes 2% to carbon emissions, when, for example, electricity generation contributes 44%, road transport 17%, and cement making 4%. So why aren't we calling for greener electricity production, no road transport, even stop building houses? I don't know. I mean, aviation contributes 2%. Yes, it's growing, but why single it out? I think aviation is an efficient way to travel, has brought people together, and on a per mile basis is probably generating even less emissions than road or rail or even boats. So yes, I agree we need to highlight these facts because we don't want to stop aviation. Certainly we want to improve it, and anything we can do to encourage by giving incentives to the manufacturers to produce greener planes, even in our airports to move towards carbon neutrality with zero offsets, which we are already doing, is very positive. But I don't think we are really the bad guy we are made out to be.
Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure I agree with that. Putting it diplomatically, I think we have to change our language on this, and I think it's absolutely dependent on country, and there are differences absolutely, and so I completely accept it may be less of an issue for Cyprus, but as you move north, it becomes far more of an issue, I believe, and I think it will become far more of an issue. And I think we need to recognise that we can't just say, well, we're not the bad guys, we're only 2%, because we know that we're growing, and we know the ability to decarbonise in aviation is far more difficult than any other sector. We need to own up to this problem. And also, if I may, and then this might be a little bit controversial, but airports over the last 5 to 10 years, all they have, they've talked about growth and increasing demand and benefits to connectivity and job creation, all those good things. I'm not saying those things aren't good, they are very good, but we need to change, I believe, the language that we actually use. And we need to start the conversation by talking about what we are doing for the planet and for the environment and for communities and noise and emissions and air quality. Let's focus on what we're doing for those things first, and then talk about the economic benefits that we bring, which are very important, but we just need to, in my view, flip the order in which we're talking about them.
It's interesting because I'm getting a question here from the audience that a lot of people seem to be very interesting, saying public opinion on aviation seems to be very critical, partly uninformed, how to change this, how to connect our industry with positive emotions. And some of you said, well, more leadership between airlines, manufacturers, airports. Robert, you're saying, well, rather than talking about growth, let's talk about all that we're doing for the environment. Is this a communications issue? How to connect with positive emotions?
Yeah, I think there's an absolute gap in the narrative. There's a lot of polluting sectors out there. We're one of them. But I think because of our disjointed supply chain in the fact that, airlines and airports and regulators and manufacturers, the communication isn't strong. So you take something like the food sector, massively more pollutant than our sector, but they're incredibly joined up. They have been joined up for decades, and therefore they're controlling the narrative. And whilst we're all kicking seven bells out of each other on all these other issues that we're having to face up to day to day, we're not able to bridge that gap of trust to get we should put everybody around the table. We should put Olivier and we should put Ayata and everybody else. We should stick them in a room, lock the door, tell them to sort it out, and not come out until they've got a solution. And then as one voice, we should talk about it, because this is an existential crisis. But it's so easy to fix, and all the other sectors have done it, and we haven't, and that's why we're sitting in the crosshair.
Should we invite Greta Thunberg to join in on that weekend retreat? Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Nicola, do you have a thought on this? Because, and you talked about populism a little while ago. I think that plays a role here in terms of the messages people get from politicians about good guys and bad guys. What's your perspective?
I would not attack politicians. I would promote concession. We are the long-term people. Maybe we could think reverse. We could say, oh, the government should think for the next centuries and decades. They cannot. Democracy makes a pressure that makes them short-term. So we have the ability, with a lot of long-term contracts in the room, to prepare the long-term, to prepare very agile solution. The hard works may be more flexible, to have programs that can change, that can adapt to growth. Yes, growth is good, but sometimes it will be less or more. We have the ability to pilot this growth of infrastructure, being more agile within the infrastructure. And yeah, let's face the fact that, yes, it's our role to be long-term. And if we are long-term, there will be positive or neutral trends, but we will adapt. What I heard is that the differences within Europe depends on situation. We experienced a situation in Portugal where there was 18% unemployment rate in 2012 when we took over. There is 7 today. So it's probably the sharpest decrease within Europe in the time. And as Eleni said, for the country, tourism and what we did with the country, with the airport growth was enormous, enormous. So you couldn't face, despite green problem, the fact that they don't recognize the importance and the value. But despite that, we all know that there is climate impact, so we need to work out so to make it sustainable. So that's why I'm confident we can work the solutions, but the differences will remain, and we need to understand for many places of the planet, tourism is really vital. The country can really collapse without the ability to attract people who come from very far away. We manage airports in Cambodia. We grow 20% a year with Chinese traveling. And the only thing we need also to think as Europeans is that the world is not going to wait for us. It's not because very rich people at some point thinks it's a luxury not to travel anymore, that the Colombians with a mountainous country, that the Indonesians with their islands are going to stop and restrain. So we need to work out, and that's our model. We are challenged taking over airports in very poor countries on the world and being immediately at the airport carbon accreditation that we started in Europe. All our airports throughout the world are decarbonized the same way. In Salvador Bahia, in Dominican Republic, that's the European leadership. We can also improve situation throughout the world, even in countries when you are first movers.
Interesting. Dalton, you talked about changing the narrative. And Robert, you talked about, well, we need to talk about all that we're doing for the environment. And Nicola, your message is, look how we're, reduced unemployment, was it 18 to 7% or in part, yeah. What should this narrative be? What should, when these guys get together for the weekend and just hash it all out, is the message really look at all the economic benefit, or is it no, we're really actually good guys on the environment? What should that message be? Who would like to answer that?
So I'm going to have a go.
Okay.
Sorry, did I jump in?
No, go on.
Are you sure?
You'll have the right
Sorry.
answer.
No. No, I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Sorry.
So I think we've got a problem. Don't get me wrong, but I'm going to be slightly controversial again. It was wonderful.
Go ahead.
I'm really supportive of all of us being up on stage, and 194 airport operators from airports, 40 operators. I got that number. Great, fantastic. But let's be honest. We're 5% of the aviation emissions. The other 95% comes from the airlines. Yep. So one of the biggest concerns that I have, we've put out this very, very positive announcements, and that's great. But of course, the opponent's going to say, very well done, airports. That's good news. Tick. However, that's such a small part of the equation. And unless we deal with airline emissions, aircraft emissions, we've still got a major existential issue on our hands. So, we've got to deal with that. And we as the airport industry are going to have to, I believe, collaborate, cooperate, support, maybe financially, and otherwise with airlines to be successful here. And if we don't, we're toast.
We're toast.
Yeah.
So we already have the, going back to
dinosaurs,
transform or die,
where
or
we
it's
started.
really transform or become toast.
Toast or dinosaurs.
Interesting. Dag, you said you wanted to answer that, and I want to hear from others as well. I'm sure we have plenty to say.
I absolutely agree with what Robert is saying here, but the IATA this month actually announced their roadmap, or part of their discussion for the roadmap. And it is exactly the same as we are saying. We have to find a solution for the aircraft itself, how the propulsion is in the future. And working together, we have a great message. And that is, we are airport operators, but we are in the same community as the airlines and the aircraft producers. So join forces, and I would like to be in that room when we discuss how we go from here. I don't think that we should not point fingers at other part of the industry. We shouldn't look at what the ships are what the mission they have, or the road. We should look at ourselves. We should not be doing greenwashing. We should be honest and polite. That's going to be hard. But also, we have to decide where are we going, how do we get there, how do we cooperate with everybody in the industry. And by doing that, they will give us new opportunities, new business models, and all the new runways you want to have. I'm convinced. You have one already, but the rest of the guys, yeah.
Other thoughts on this? Eleni, you said you wanted to, I think, Monica, you were looking,
Yes.
you wanted to...
Should I
Go ahead, go ahead.
I think you put the question as an alternative. Should we present the benefits or say the thing about how well we're doing? I don't think they are alternatives. I think we're doing both, or we can do both, or we should do both. I think the benefits we bring to the economy, to the people, are indisputable. And everybody more or less accepts what they are. Now, to do them and be sustainable as well is something we are also doing. Maybe we should say more about what we are doing in terms of the sustainability question. Can we do more? Certainly. Should we do more? Yes. But I don't think they're alternatives. We can produce economic benefit and be sustainable. I think we bring a lot of value to the communities for which we work. I mean, ultimately, nobody really comes to the airport. They come to the area that we serve. So I think both can be answered positively in the same way. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Interesting. Who else? Who has further thoughts on this one? It's okay if you don't. We can move on. But
no, well, in terms of the messaging, we have to be transparent and authentic, because that's where messaging is falling down across so many industries. So we have to be authentic and transparent and acknowledge there's an issue, that we are a pollutant, but we are doing a huge amount as an industry. There's tons of good stuff going on in terms of sustainable fuel development, what we're doing in terms of engine technology. There's all sorts of stuff, but we don't talk about it, and we have to educate further the benefits that this industry brings in terms of keeping the world going. And if we dry up because we tax the guts out of this industry, it's so short term. We're better off enabling commerce and taxing commerce to try and use that money to deal with the issue that we face.
Interesting. Nicola.
Yeah, I think we have a lot to do operationally. The constraints that we face with airlines make that we just entered Gatwick, as you know, but the self-backdrop way they did, I think is very recognized by EasyJet and British Airways, and the way they worked it out was very positive. I think seamless experience on the digital side for security, for passport, whatever, something we can work out also with airlines. So I think we need to go out of the trend of confrontation and go to a very positive period. And I think probably the external pressure, that was my former message, can help to say, okay, forget about these things that are on your agenda, and also that will be one of the messages we can give to the Commission after. Stop this new directive about regulation of it, wasting time on such an issue that will not change European people's life. Well, we have to take care together on better issues is something.
Interesting. Thank you. I don't want to just focus on the environmental issues. I want to focus on the broader business issues as well. And one of the things that's very much on my mind, it goes back to the threat of outsiders, is what we see is many airports, and I'm sure almost all of you are investing in more automation, more e-boarding gates, e-passport control, and so on. And others are investing more in sort of creating a customer experience that delights and enchants. Are these two separate ideas, or are they conflicting, or are they both on the same track? And the reason why I'm asking this is I had some discussions recently with Google. And the message was very clear. They're like, and you don't have to agree with this, is look, we're smarter than you, we can move faster than you, and we've got better data than you. The only thing that we don't have is physical contact with customers, which is something that you do. And so the more that you automate, the more that you reduce contact with your customers, hey, that's great for us. Who wants to take that one on? Go ahead.
Look, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you need to look at both of them together. David, you need one to enable the other. I think the example of Dublin Airport, which over a decade ago had some of the worst passenger experience numbers in the industry, and tonight we're up for an award. And
We're not, no.
Who gives the award out?
I don't know.
No, well, anyway,
ask Olivier.
We're up for an award in terms of.
I can make a call if you like.
And Dublin would be an example where it has turned. Look, it doesn't get it right every day, but it has turned its passenger experience around. But it's had to use technology to enable it to do that. In terms of all the technology we're also familiar with, in terms of different automation, parking automation, self-scanning, all the good stuff that we do. So I think they're not mutually exclusive. I think you need both. We have to take cost out of our business, and we have to reinvest that in the touch points that really make a difference for passengers. And today, many of our passengers, because they don't like interaction. The millennials today go to restaurants, and they don't want to be served by a waitress or a waiter. They want to make their order on an iPhone and send it to the kitchen. So we have to be careful about the interaction, the human connection that Google's talking about. But there are places where people do want a human connection because it's a very stressful environment and it's not going to change. And there are places where we need to use technology to take cost out, improve the passenger experience, and use that money to invest elsewhere.
That was shameless promotion of his prospects of winning the award tonight, wasn't it? I mean, if Dublin wins, I'm going to appeal. Okay, all right. So I hope you clocked that, Olivier. So no, I would agree with Dalton. They're not mutually exclusive. Those of you who have been through London City, well, actually, for many years. Probably benefited from the enormous speed and efficiency which we offer. It's our DNA, it's our USP, it's what we do. Speed and efficiency, absolutely through the airport. And surprisingly, with only speed and efficiency, we are an award-winning airport, which is great. So we could form the view that all this sense of place palaver is a waste of time. I don't subscribe to that view, by the way. I think it's incredibly important for us to create destinations, and now we've sort of moved on from sense of place, and now we're talking about spirit of place, and I think we need to do both. I think we need to create an amazing look and feel, a surprise and delight, a sense of place, a spirit of place that is engaging for our passengers in their senses for human beings, human interaction, designs that are very, very centrally connected with the locations that we represent. In Hermes and what they're doing in Paphos and Larnaca, I think they're really focused on their sense of place, which I think is fabulous. You've got two airports here that are representing Cyprus. That having been said, you can never get away from our ability and our need to ensure that we are very, very technology focused and delivering to our customers that speed of service which many want.
Interesting. Nicola, you were the first to talk about sense of place, so I'm very interested in what you have to say.
We need to do both ways. We manage also highways. Can you imagine for airports and highways, if the contact with the customers is queuing, it's not so positive. So if you don't invest a little bit in technology so that their experience is not take a highway, I queued for 1 hour, I pay. And I see your logo and your... So that's not very popular. And it's the same for us if the customer experience is the queuing at security to remove this and so on, the bottles, and that's the experience. So we need to digitalize, to evolve, use technology in order to have a seamless, efficient experience on some bad or less good aspects of our activity. And we need, exactly as you said, David, to humanize experience in other parts. Let's take maintenance. We never think about maintenance. I think we are in Middle Ages in maintenance. Maintenance should be very modern. People want to be part of the fact that they detected a travelator and elevator is not working. Give the feedback, have the outcome, have an immediate answer. We can be very good at that. Are we so? We can be better. Instead of investing billions in something, I mentioned these concrete cathedrals of the past. If you could adapt and repair in less than an hour, less than 20 minutes. That's passenger experience. And then have the feedback on Twitter. We are working about that. We have the Twitter on many aspects and the feedback of customers in the emergency room in Lyon. And we move more about customer experience feedback, immediate feedback, and we give the answer to the people about this aspect of, you detected this in maintenance, we acted, and this is the answer. and we try to make them part of the group. So yeah, that's the part of the customer experience and sense of place. I just mentioned Japan because we welcomed the G20 today in Osaka. The difficulty was the cultural challenge and the profitability challenge. The only solution is local. If you just say, oh, we are going to squeeze people in order to make them buy more whiskey and cigarettes, even the people of the teams react. If you do this, but in showing we are going to make it a Japanese style, modern style mall, they accept. And they accepted, and we get high profitability, but also something completely new, and that they don't see the same in Singapore or in New York. So I think sense of place and identity can be shown, but with profitability in our airports.
Monica, what do you think about this? Because I'm sure at your airport it's mostly foreign visitors or tourists.
Yeah.
And so you have a very different dynamic than, let's say, London City. So from your perspective. Yeah.
No, I think that, of course, the technologies and customer experience are both a part of the same game. So we need to take care about both of them. But in any case, I think that the flexibility, to take care about the different segment of passengers. Of course, there are some passengers that needs some personal contact, so we have not to forget this, and so we have to manage both the use of technologies. Of course, we need to take less cost somehow to avoid the queue, to make all these kind of things to facilitate the passage inside the airports. But in any case, we also need to speak with our passengers, especially if they are on a older age than millennials, and to take care about all they needs, what they need, and to have a personal contact is very important for me.
Doug?
Yeah. Are we afraid of Google? Well, I'm not. But if Google think that we should socialize with the man or the girl in the security control, I think they're on the wrong track. Mm-hmm. What you want to socialize with the people you're traveling together with or meeting, so you have to make the arena a nice place to be. So the part of the travel is being at the airport. You're not socializing in a queue or in a baggage drop or in a check-in counter. So I think they are totally wrong,
okay.
And it's not a threat at all. They're there, and we just have to cope with them. I see an airport as a meeting point where things can happen, where business can develop, where we can support whatever goes on inside the country or globally. So, no, airport will have a very, very strong positions in the many, many years that we can see in the future. So, it's not a threat.
Eleni?
I think that technology is actually what enables us to offer a better service to our passengers. At the end of the day, this is what we want, to offer the best possible service. So through technology, we can take out maybe the most simple or straightforward or jobs that can be subject to technological adjustment, let's say, or innovation, and use the time that we save from our employees to offer personalized services, whether that's in the sense of place or what we want to do, which is the concept of philoxenia, which is Greek for hospitality. So take out of the chain the sort of repetitive kind of jobs, give them to technology, and use the people to offer the personalized kind of service that you need. I don't think there is anything to worry about, either in terms of, where will the people go. I think that we already have difficulty securing staff to do these most simple tasks, so the more we can use technology for those, I think the better for everybody, and we can use the staff that we have towards more meaningful tasks. And finally, I think not everything can be subject to technology. I mean, you can make the perfect plan, but we all know that every day is not the same, and things never go according to plan. So you'll always need people with creativity and initiative to resolve these problems that are bound to arise every day, whatever the plan that you do.
Interesting, very interesting. I think we could talk about this for a long time. Is there anyone else who has a final comment on this? Because then I wanted to ask, I'm told we need to move on. One last question. Next time we can maybe talk about, is Google really a threat or not? But next time. The speaker that's following us today is Philip Cornelis, Director of Aviation for the European Commission. In one sentence, I'm going to insist upon this, in one sentence, right? What is the thing that you wish he understood just a little bit better? I don't know if he's in the room even. Hello. What is the one thing you wish that this wonderful gentleman understood a little bit better about the airport industry? One sentence, please.
Dead silence. What a brilliant opportunity to have an absolute opportunity to speak to your regulator sitting right there in front of you, to say something very important but very diplomatic. So we know Philip very, very well, and I think the Commission's view on our industry has changed, and I think come a long way. I think it's fair to say we work very, very closely with Philippe. The one thing which I would perhaps like to stress...
one sentence.
One thing. Oh dear. Okay. All right. Okay. Is competition. I strongly believe that actually our industry is actually highly competitive, and I know our airlines don't believe that. I'm going more than one sentence, aren't I, Dave? But I do believe we are an increasingly competitive industry, and I think if the Commission sort of understands that, I think they will come at regulation from the perspective that we compete. We genuinely compete, and that's really important that they understand that.
Other messages? Dag, one sentence. Put the pressure on, sorry.
My experience with politicians is that they more like to have solutions than problems. So I would very much have the task from the politicians. Can you, as an industry, not only as airport operators, but as an industry, come to us within a half year and design a future and what kind of measures need to be taken? So we can do it from the inside, not bringing the problem, bringing the solution to the politicians. That is my wish, that we could get together and design the future and present it to you, so you just could say, fine, we go in that direction.
Great. Interesting. Anyone else? Yeah. Nicolas, and then let's...
Please. No, on my point of view, planning, programming, and help us in translating somehow traffic development in something that can be very sustainable in the future.
Nicolas, thank you.
I would
thank you,
say
Monica.
very deeply, air mobility is one of the major success of Europe. It brings peace, it brings prosperity. There are peripheric regions, we benefit from it. There are central regions where, sorry for some our British colleagues, the weather is not so good, so you like to go in other places. But it is a success. We can sustain this success. Airports are competitive actors of this success. We are leaders in the world to manage airports from other continents. Please work with us in this challenging world, because we are challenged. Europe is more fragile compared to mega states who can invest billions immediately. So our competitive, fragile model is at stake. We need you to support it, because we think it's bringing positive rewards to Europeans as a whole.
Dalton, and then we're going to end with Eleni.
So I just sort of building on Robert's, we are a smaller part of the profit pool. We need to invest in infrastructure and sustainable development. And, we are a very competitive market. And in Europe, most people are within 2 hours of 2 major airports. It is a highly competitive market. And I think sometimes we're not seen by the Commission as operating in such a competitive market. And yet we saw today that the airlines have 50% higher returns in terms of return on invested capital than we do.
Eleni, we started with you. We need to finish with you. Your message.
My message is that airports are in competition with each other. There is no doubt about that. So there is no need to worry that we are a monopoly in any way. And the second thing is that airports themselves have a vested interest to change, to improve their services, continuously improve their services, and prove their sustainability credentials to the outside world. So we all need to work together because we are working in the same direction and not against each other in order to further improve what we set out to do, which is to facilitate people's lives when they travel through our airports and the whole system.
Thank you all very, very much. And ladies and gentlemen, join me in a warm round of applause for all of our panelists. And thank you for your very, very frank and insightful comments. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Indeed. Indeed, thank you very much, David. Mind your microphone as well, behind you. That was indeed a great conversation and a really, really illuminating discussion around sort of the airport perspective. I particularly enjoyed that bit where there was conversation around sort of digitize versus humanize as well. So before lunch, we have a final session. Already, Philip Cornelis has been introduced. And of course, in this part of the world, you can go by the name Philippos, like my name as well. So this special presentation focuses on the European aviation policy, where we are and what next. So it does give me great pleasure to invite Philip Cornelis to the stage to deliver his presentation.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues. It is indeed a real pleasure and an honor for me to be with you today. And let me start by thanking our Cypriot hosts and ACI Europe team for the excellent organization of this event, which indeed has become a must-attend rendezvous every year that I'm pleased to be invited to. I'm pleased to see so many of you here today also committed to discussing about the future of the European airport industry and more broadly of the European aviation policy. It's more than ever an exciting and challenging time to be involved in the business of flying. And this is where you expect European official to start saying he wants to mention some challenges for the future. Rest assured, I will get there. But first, I would like to share with you a few reflections on the current state of the sector from our perspective. And let's be fair, global and European aviation have been doing very well over the last years. These have been the best years ever for civil aviation, with strong growth in passenger numbers and strong financial performance by airlines and in fact by all layers of the aviation value network. Congratulations. European aviation has now fully recovered from the 2008 crisis and the subsequent downturn and has moved well beyond recovery. It has reached new heights with 1.2 billion passengers and over 18 million tons of freight and mail, totaling more than 11 million flights in European airspace every year. Last year, the busiest day ever in European airspace was recorded on the 7th of September, with more than 37,000 flights in one single day. And we had also last year 19 days with more than 36,000 flights per day. This is like nothing we have experienced before, and this year is set to beat those records again. This growth has been possible, and it's been mentioned before this morning, thanks to the open and competitive European internal market for aviation. It has brought huge benefits to Europeans. Europeans have more choices, lower prices, and greater connectivity. Connectivity is a great good, and we must make sure that it remains like that. However, it is not self-evident, and Cypriots know a thing or two about this. We must all continue to work hard to ensure connectivity both at regional and global level, while ensuring sustainable growth, keeping in mind the need to mitigate the aviation environmental footprint. Moreover, economic cycles move in spirals, and an upward trend is usually followed by a downward trend, and the first quarter results of a number of airlines have shown pressure on yields and indicate that the downward trend might have started, and Olivier spoke about this this morning in his State of the Industry address. Looking back at the Commission's mandate that is now finishing, we had the Aviation Strategy, that was adopted 3.5 years ago, and I'm proud to mention some of our main achievements over the last year. We have, first of all, completely revised the EASA Basic Safety Regulation and have, building on that, already put in place a totally new and wide-ranging regulatory framework for the operation of drones in Europe. In the field of the environment, we have started to implement the global scheme towards aviation's carbon-neutral growth from 2020, CORSIA, of which the rules were adopted at ICAO in the last years, and the remaining elements are in the process of being adopted and will be completed in the coming months. We have also taken significant steps to enhance our links with third country partners, and several agreements are awaiting signature soon, I hope, and we plan to go to Council in the next days, actually, for some further signatures, and other agreements are in the final stages of negotiations. And we have introduced new rules to allow EU carriers to compete on a level playing field with third country airlines. The old 868 now has its successor that is called 712. Friends, I read with interest the many topics for this year's conference, which include decarbonization, sustainability, capacity in the air and on the ground, jet fuel prices, airports, airlines relationship, airport investments, to name just a few. Each of the issues we will discuss over these days here in Limassol are important for us at the Commission, and your reflections will allow us to better understand the current market dynamics and developments, and we remain committed to help you address those issues. Now that the European Parliament has been elected, we are all waiting for the next Commission to take office, and who knows, maybe in a few days' time we will know who will be the next Commission President. And then in the months to come, they will start setting out the political priorities for the next 5 years. I cannot, of course, speculate on what those priorities may be, but I can assure you that we will, as EU-wide regulators, continue to help ensure that the regulatory framework for aviation enables the sector to make a full contribution to sustainable economic growth without compromising the high standards consumers rightly expect from the industry. Today, what is perhaps different from the start of the previous Commission mandate and when we prepared the aviation strategy, today we see that European aviation in a way risks to become the victim of its own success over the past years. The strong growth has brought congestion, delays, and an increasingly conspicuous environmental footprint. So let me turn to the biggest sustainability challenge, which is the environment. You all have heard the calls for limiting the growth in aviation through legislative action in large parts of Europe, and increasingly so. There are pleas to increase taxation of aviation at Europe-wide level, or to increase the cost of tickets as flying is considered too cheap. In a way, being cheap is of course a tribute to the success of this industry that has turned aviation over the last 25 years from a luxury product into a service that almost anyone in Europe can afford. Connectivity has opened so many new possibilities and allowed people to discover new places and meet other people around the world. But as we can see, these positive effects should not be taken for granted, and for that reason, in our view, the most important challenge the sector is facing today is to address its environmental footprint and to deliver genuinely sustainable growth. And the only way to retain, and in some cases win back, a positive public opinion in the long run will be to decarbonize, to the extent possible, the sector. Sorry. According to the European Aviation Environmental Report 2019 that we published a couple of months ago with the help of EASA, Eurocontrol and the European Environmental Agency, full flight CO2 emissions have increased by 10% over the last 5 years, despite the efficiency gains at passenger kilometer level. And according to the forecasts, emissions will increase by a further 21% by 2040 if additional action is not taken. It's very simple. Aviation is growing faster than the technology is improving. So overall emissions from aviation will continue to go up and not down as in almost all other economic sectors. That is the true challenge we are facing, despite accounting for only a small percentage of overall emissions. Now, to turn this trend, we need to find pathways to decarbonize. And we know that this is not easy in aviation, but we need to go there by cooperating among everybody involved and by putting all efforts together. And I want to take this opportunity to commend the ACI Europe with Olivier and his capable team. We are in contact on sustainability with all aviation stakeholders, but consistently the inputs we receive from ACI are amongst the most comprehensive ones we get. In the same way, I want to commend and congratulate you with the adoption of your resolution on net zero emissions by 2050. This is bold, this is innovative, as much as it is necessary. But as was mentioned in the panel just now, it's not enough that airports take this action. There are many other players in the aviation sector, and to be clear for the citizens, it is one product. It is flying. So we need a multitude of measures by all participants in the sector, airlines, airports, air navigation service providers, manufacturers, and so on. And I call on you to help us assemble all those stakeholders together in this direction. Some of the measures that are ongoing, the entry into force of CORSIA in 2021 should deliver significant improvements on a global scale that we have not seen in the past. It's a good start. It's not enough, but it's an important start. But in my view, the large-scale uptake of sustainable alternative fuels will be the second most important component in the basket of measures that we need to develop together. Besides that, we have ETS, we have the need to improve flight efficiency through the implementation of modern ATM methods. We have research and innovation at the aircraft and engine level and new technologies that will all play an important role and have to be counted together. It's very good to see that the airport community is ready to be at the forefront of this essential common effort. But as the theme of this conference suggests, there are more sustainability challenges than only the environmental one. I also see the negative impact of capacity as a sustainability challenge, particularly for the consumer, and this both in respect of the ATM capacity crunch and the airport capacity crunch. I mentioned consumers earlier, and I would like to develop this point a bit more. Passengers are the raison d'être of aviation, so above all, any future initiatives related to the internal market rules have to put the interests of the citizen, of the consumer, of the people first. In this context, the lack of capacity in the air and on the ground is a matter of utmost concern going forward for the European aviation sector. Looking up in the skies, the future evolution of the single European sky is dependent on its ability to overcome the ATM capacity constraints it is facing today. Efficient and innovative actions need to be put in place both in the short term, for example, to minimize delays like those that we expect to experience this summer again, like last summer, with the help of the network manager at Eurocontrol. But also, and perhaps more critically, in the long term, we need to secure a sustainable development of the ATM sector and ATM capacity in the future. The Airspace Architecture Study and the Wise Persons Group report and recommendations that have been released recently have been precisely looking into the long-term aspects of the ATM sector. The Airspace Architecture Study highlights the importance of ATM data to be shared on a large scale in the future in a much more digitalized ATM system, and it suggests that a new ATM data service delivery model is needed to decouple the provision of data services from the actual ATM service, and enabling more collaborative decision-making also between the air and the ground, between airports and the tower and the ATM system further down. The collective recommendations from the Wise Persons Group are also aimed to provide clarity on how to best offer additional ATM capacity in a flexible, more scalable, more sustainable manner, more resilient manner, while continuing to ensure safety and security. It is very important that the Commission and Member States can agree on the overall direction for the future system And a conference will be organized together with the Finnish presidency on this topic in September, on the 12th of September. It will be essential to have all stakeholders, including ACI and the other participants in the sector, to subscribe to the measures that are proposed in that recent work that has been undertaken. Too often we have seen in the Commission that once we come to the Council, the Member States say, do we really need to do this in ATM? And we need industry to say, yes, we do need to do this. This will be an important signal to the Member States, but also to the incoming European Parliament and Commission to implement the proposed measures by updating and upgrading the Commission's CES2 Plus proposal. Now let me go back a moment to the ground. Europe relies on airports to keep its citizens, businesses and regions connected. This is particularly true for island nations like Cyprus, but also for other regions. Airport capacity is becoming scarce at an increasing number of airports, and ACI Europe published 2 years ago a study highlighting the potential adverse impact of those constraints on consumers that would translate into higher airfares. The simple, obvious answer would be build or expand. We all know that trying to build a new airport anywhere in the EU is almost impossible. And even trying to build a new runway is not an easy task. On the other hand, one should also recognize that in some parts of Europe there has been an oversupply of airport capacity, in particular at smaller regional airports, as was highlighted by the Commission in the 2014 State Aid Guidelines. We must now try and exploit this idle capacity as much as possible. From our perspective, it is vital that the European regulatory framework ensures that airports are able to finance necessary investments that are in consumers' interests. There is no EU piece of legislation tackling this aspect directly, as development of airport capacity is affected by national, regional, public policy issues such as connectivity policy of scarcely populated or remote areas, land planning policy, environmental policy. Sufficient and efficient levels of airport investment are an essential prerequisite if airports are to continue to deliver capacity, quality and connectivity. We have always acknowledged that it is important for investors in airports to receive a fair return on their assets and investments. Of course, consumers should only pay for efficient and timely investment. While the source of financing of these investments may be very different, on average half of the revenues come from airport charges, with ground handling also being a non-negligible source. I'm fully aware that it is not always easy to reconcile the need for airport investment with airlines' expectations to not increase the cost of airport operations. And I was encouraged by the call just now to try to overcome this divide and work with airlines and other stakeholders on a future-oriented agenda to help the sector as a whole. And that brings me to my final point on the challenge of what I call regulatory sustainability. And under this banner, I would like to bring an update of our policies on issues of direct interest to you. Our focus in reviewing the Airport Charges Directive, as well as later on the Ground Handling Directive, is to promote efficiency in the market for airport services to the benefit of consumers. And let me repeat what Commission representatives have said many times in the past. Where airports are subject to effective competition, it is the market that should determine the level of charges. On the other hand, where markets operate, and hopefully they operate well in as many places as possible, but where markets operate, it is also possible to have market failure. A market failure could be a risk of misuse of market power, either by airports or airlines. And in such cases, the regulator may need to intervene to protect the interests of the passengers. A competitive airport market provides the right type of incentives for airport operators to bring forward necessary investment and to deliver service quality at a good price. The same is true for the airlines market. If competition is not effective, the people who suffer are the consumers. So a modern and flexible regulation has to put the interest of consumers, all passengers and shippers, present or future, right at its heart. Both airlines and the airports are vital for the aviation sector to function properly, but I am no doubt that if conflicts arise, the regulator must be squarely on whose side? The consumer side. I believe all these elements are accurately reflected in the Commission's ongoing work on the Airport Charges Directive. And we will be able to publish the evaluation very soon, I hope, in the coming days. The impact assessment is now in full swing, and we are doing this work in full transparency and with strong stakeholder involvement. Apologies. Including, as early as next week, a workshop with airlines and airports on the directive and on the impact assessment. You may be aware that we have also embarked recently on an evaluation of the ground handling directive to assess in detail whether its objectives are still valid and whether there is a need to revise the rules in the light of possible market developments. And we'll be interested to hear your views on this. At this stage, however, this is just a stock-taking evaluation. In parallel with the work that I've just mentioned, we believe the efficient use of existing infrastructure should also be maximized as much as possible. And this brings me to our present reflection on the slots regulation. We believe that the existing rules must be improved, in particular in view of recent market developments and new practices that have developed in the allocation and use of slots. Issues like bankrupt market exits, secondary trading have developed very strongly in past years, and we should take this on board in order to ensure the best use of the existing capacity. So please do continue to engage constructively with my team on all these very important aspects. My message to all of you here is that dialogue and consultation between all parties in the aviation supply chain, where airports play a prominent role, it's not only good practice, but it's one which is definitely needed if we are to keep European aviation sector highly competitive and sustainable. Allow me a last word on Brexit, which continues to pose a considerable challenge of uncertainty on the aviation sector. You know, of course, it was not our choice, and I'm sure it was not yours either. But it is there. We have done our homework by adopting contingency measures on maintaining basic air connectivity, aviation safety and security in the case of no-deal Brexit. Clearly, being outside the internal market will not be the same thing for the UK as being inside the internal market. We need to stay optimistic, but at the same time the industry has to take all measures to mitigate any possible disruptions caused by a no-deal Brexit. Our preferred outcome, of course, remains the adoption and implementation of the withdrawal treaty that would give us the time to negotiate a new future relationship with the UK. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, I feel privileged to have had the opportunity to address you here today. From the many challenges we face in aviation and on the sustainability of aviation in particular, I decided to focus on three: the environment, the question of capacity, and the question of European regulation. I hope I offered some food for thought for your upcoming discussions. I will be very happy to learn from your discussions and hear your views as we move forward together at European level. I wish you all a most inspiring and successful conference in this wonderful location. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cornelis. Indeed, you gave us a lot of food for thought, and we're ready for some real food now. Let me invite you to actually to enjoy lunch. It's in the exhibition hall. We have a full hour for lunch, so please do come back here, and we start at 1:45. Please take the time to also visit the exhibiting companies in the exhibition hall. Enjoy your lunch.